Welcome to you all. My name is Judith Pucci. I am one of many 9/11 Tribute Center walking tour guides. And you are here today to hear stories that are part of the We Were There program, which is produced by the 9/11 Tribute Center. The stories you're going to hear today go beyond the big historic events of September 11th, the events we all know, the events that changed all of our lives. These stories instead focus on the personal costs of that day. So I'm going to introduce you now to your two storytellers. Next to me are Frank Corleone, and next to Frank is Susan Wiley. And I'm sure you can figure out which is which. Susan is an assistant director. She works at the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which to us in New York is the MTA. They're the ones that run the subways and the buses. But on September 11th, she worked for a different company. She worked for a company called Aon Insurance Risk Services. And they were located in the South Tower. Now, the South Tower was the second building to be hit that morning. And Susan's office was very high up in that building. She was on the 92nd floor. So she was above the point of impact, meaning she was above where the plane entered the building. As for Frank, Frank is a man of many talents. He is a now retired teacher, he is an iron worker, and he is also a soldier in the National Guard. All three of these facets of his life extraordinarily came together on September 11th. So that's what he'll be talking to you about when he tells you his story. But we're going to begin with Susan. So I'm going to very briefly set the scene for you. The second plane struck the South Tower, about 12 floors below where Susan was located. So Susan was here, very near the top of the building. The plane enters below. Being above impact in either of the towers was the most dangerous place you could be that morning. The reason Susan is here is because the North Tower had already been attacked. So the 17 minutes that separated plane 1 from plane 2, in those 17 minutes, Susan and thousands of other people in her building had time to make a decision. They would stay at their desks or they would leave the building. Fortunately, Susan left the building. And I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you. My story actually starts about a year before September 11th, when I had an uneasy feeling. I didn't understand it, but I had a strong sense that change was coming. So these feelings were gnawing at my head. I couldn't really quite get rid of them. So I told my friend Rose. Rose and I were colleagues, neighbors, and train buddies. And we used to go to work in the morning and at night, and we shared many conversations. Boyfriend problems, life problems, but the one conversation that always came back to the forefront was this feeling of uncertainty. And I told Rose that we're going to look back one day, and life as we know it is going to be different. Fast forward to July of 2001, and these feelings became stronger. And I was thinking about my own mortality. So I started to reorganize my life and even gave away some of my jewelry to family members. It didn't feel right to keep jewelry in a drawer collecting dust. It was meant to be shared. You see, my backstory is that for half my life, I've been mourning the loss of my 3 siblings, Billy, Ann, and Tommy. Tommy was a New York City probationary firefighter. And I think back to the days when we used to hang out every Friday night playing cards for money, because we wanted to keep it in the family. I just remember Tommy sitting back saying how he couldn't wait for his first big fire. But in the same breath, he said he'd be the next to go. And 3 months later, Tommy was killed in his first fire in the line of duty. I unexpectedly changed jobs 3 weeks before September 11th. Now, on the morning of September 11th, I'm working for a company, for Aon Insurance Risk Services, and I'm on the 92nd floor of the South Tower. And I'm looking at this beautiful view of the island of Manhattan, a cloudless day, the sun shining brightly, and I hear my colleague talking about a plane. And I didn't think too much of it until she started pointing out the window, and she started to shout, and she said, "Oh my God, oh my God." And when I looked up, I saw a large commercial plane with the letters AA in red and blue stripes. And I can hear the sound of the plane as it was rushing towards the window. And it felt like it was going to land on top of my head. Instead, it made a slight turn, and it plunged quietly into the North Tower. And the wings were sucked up against the building, flush. The nose disappeared, and there were 2 small fires in each wing. But the rest of the plane remained intact, as if it was still in flight. Then there was a massive explosion. A huge fireball erupted with multiple colors and shredded paper shooting into the sky. And I can feel a flash of heat singe my necklace. And now it looks like a 4th of July spectacular display. But now the sun is sitting over this horrific scene. And I felt death. But in my heart, I felt like they went to heaven. My body shook with fear. I went back to my desk, grabbed my pocketbook, shut off my computer, and went with my friend Julie to the other side of the towers because we were in a temporary location where we met this woman, Diane. And I told her what happened because if you didn't see it and you didn't hear it, you had no idea. So she was going to evacuate our office. And as she was doing that, I just remember seeing my boss, Larry Nadell, from across the room, clutching the window, watching that fire. And I never saw him again. Diane led us down the stairwell, and I immediately started to cry thinking about those people who died. So I had to imagine being somewhere else. I just pretended I was in Atlantic City playing roulette. And every time I made it down another floor, I would just say, floor 82, black or red, place your bets. And I did it again and again and again until some woman told me to shut up. So I did. Then we made it down to the 78th Sky Lobby. We were deciding what to do when we heard the announcement that the building is secure. You can go back to your desk. And people started walking back up. But since we had that visual, we knew intuitively we had to keep going down. So we decided to keep walking despite Diane having trouble with her knees. So we're walking and we're walking and we're walking when my friend Julie gets a phone call. And I knew where I was because I'm still counting floors, but inside my head this time. And I knew we were on the 56th floor when she said that we were safe, we're getting out, and click. And what happens but a massive explosion hits our tower. I didn't know what it was. I immediately thought it was a secondary gas explosion from the first attack. What I didn't know was that a second plane just hit our tower. So the stairwell shook us violently from side to side like a roller coaster, and we all screamed. And I felt death. And I heard God's voice in my head saying, Susan, that's it. You're coming with me, let's go. And I followed a vision of falling down a stairwell trapped with no way out. And then I thought about my 3 siblings, and I can feel their presence, and I knew they were with me. And then I realized that I was still alive, and I went from death to life like a switch being turned on and off. And all of a sudden, I felt this overwhelming presence. I call it God's amazing grace. It was this barrier where nothing bad could penetrate. An emotional calmness came over me, and I knew I was going to be okay. And I told Diane, let me help you. My parents lost 3 children. I'm not going to be number 4 to go. Let me help you. I know that God will protect us. And this man's voice came from behind us and said, stay calm. Let's keep moving a little faster and we'll get out. And we followed his instructions. We made it all the way down out of the building where we can see the plaza was just filled with gray matter. And the cops kept saying, keep moving, don't look back. And when I got outside, I had to look back. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I see these 2 towers burning. How do they get out of there? And I hear my mother's voice saying, Susan, run. As I'm hearing her voice in my head, my girlfriend Julie starts speaking the words. And we locked arms and we ran. And we didn't stop running because we thought the towers were going to come down like this. Made it to the courthouse. I was able to call my twin sister. I told her I was okay. But she said she thought for a moment that I didn't make it. But she's like, yeah, you're the lucky twin. You can step in, you know what, and come out smelling like a rose. But she couldn't convince my dad. He had to really hear my voice to know that I was alive. So he kept saying to my sister, not again, not again. When I stepped outside, a few minutes later, I watched the South Tower collapse. And I was confused and horrified. 30 minutes later, I watched the North Tower collapse. I knew thousands of people died, and nothing felt real. I made it home at the bus stop at 6 o'clock, greeted by my family. You couldn't tell by looking at me that I had survived the attacks. I felt very detached, almost like I wasn't there and that somebody else was walking in my shoes. And when I got home to my front door, My train buddy Rose came running up to me saying, "Oh my God, Susan, oh my God." And she recalled our conversations on the subway. "How did you get out?" And I said to her, "I just walked down." But we both looked at each other and knew that I did not walk alone. And days later, I remember that vision in the stairwell, and I knew that God was with me. Thank you.
$20,000. That is the number of people that safely evacuated the Twin Towers that morning. 20,000. It's a number we don't hear about too often. The number we do hear about are the nearly 3,000 people who were killed that day, and that is completely the way it should be. Among those 3,000 people, 176 of them were Susan's colleagues. So getting out of that building, even though for you just came down methodically all of those stairs, it was a crapshoot. Who would live and who would die? Now, as Susan and thousands of other people are running to safely away from the Trade Center, there are other thousands of workers from the unions and city agencies who are doing the opposite. They are all rushing into the Trade Center, and they're going with the same objective. They're trying to be of help, of service to our first responders. Frank was one of those people who was going into the Trade Center. All yours.
Yeah. 9/11 was a beautiful morning. I'm there in my classroom teaching structural welding to my high school students. And I got a phone call from my wife. She said, "Turn on the TV. The Trade Center just got hit with a plane." So we turned on the TV, and myself and my students were looking at it in amazement. I didn't realize that it was a terrorist attack. I just thought it was a plane that accidentally hit the Trade Center. It's big and tall. It's bound to happen. So we didn't really react right away. And then second plane hit, and then it was apparent that we were under attack. My students got upset. Some of them had parents that were supposed to be down there, and they're asking me questions like, "Do you think the Trade Center will collapse?" And I said, "No, it's not going to happen." I was there when they were building it. I was an iron worker in those days, and it was built very, very strong. And besides, skyscrapers are built to take the impact of planes. So like the Empire State Building was hit once before, and it's still standing, right? He said, "Yeah." So right after I basically, let them know what kind of a fool I was, the Trade Center started to collapse one by one, and we're just sitting there and amazing. So now I know it's an attack, and I'm in the National Guard, so I found out the nearest National Guard unit was on 79th Street. So I took my car, ran up there with it, and get into the Armory, and sure enough, there's somebody that I know, Lieutenant Colonel Messler. He takes one look at me, he says, "Frank," and he says, "go get your torches and get down to the Trade Center." I said, "Okay, sir." He gave me a Humvee with a medic. Went back to my school, told the principal, "I'm taking the torch." He says, "No, you're not." I says, "Not only that, but we're changing the school into a temporary morgue by orders of Lieutenant Colonel Messler." So, reluctantly, he gave me the torches. I took off, went back to the Armory, and meanwhile, I'm really feeling anger because I really felt that the government and the military in particular let us down and allowed these idiots to crash into our buildings. And I got down to the Armory, and the colonel told me, he said, "What can you do besides going down with one torch?" I said, "Well, I can call up Local 40, the ironworkers, my union. They built it, they can help us out." He says, "Fine, do that." I did that. I talked to the Walshes, and they said, "Frank, we got 3,000 phone calls for volunteers to go down there already, and we have guys down there already." I says, "Great." Meanwhile, Colonel Messler put a word out that we need cutters, so we filled up the Armory with a bunch of tradespeople that wanted to volunteer to go down there, and I basically got a caravan and brought them down there. But it wasn't that easy to get them down there because they had no equipment, so we stopped off at a distributor, McKinney, and he gave us all the equipment in a tanker truck full of gases so we can take it down there with us. It still wasn't that easy getting down there because they had these freeze lines all over the place, and they were afraid that Building 7 was going to collapse. And some of the tradespeople that I was with, especially the iron workers, they just wanted to go through anyway. I said, look, guys, the police say the building's going to collapse. We'll go a different way. No, we're going this way. And sure enough, the building collapsed. And we're watching the debris, shoot up the street. Thank God we didn't get underneath it. We wouldn't be here to talk about it today. So finally, later on, we got everybody down there, and everybody disappeared. They just started doing their own thing. It was like organized chaos down there. We had crane operators that took their cranes off the jobs. Bulldozer guys took their bulldozers down there. Everybody's going back and forth with heavy machinery. It was amazing that nobody got killed down there that day. And they just started to try to save people. I got down there, I did what I could. We went through some of the voids, listening for the sounds of maybe somebody trapped down there. And we did this for about 3 days with the National Guard. And then after 3 days, they disbanded this task force that we formed. And I ended up joining the iron workers. The iron workers sent me down there, and I joined a gang of iron workers, and we searched and we took steel off this pile. This pile was, the whole area was amazing. There was dust all over the place. It looked like everybody was a ghost. Everybody was covered with this dust. People were writing notes on dashboards and on the windshields of cars, please help, God help us. So the whole scene was eerie. You walked on steel and you saw that it was glowing underneath you. It was hot. The fumes were coming up. They were burning our throats. We wore dust masks and respirators, but the heat and the fumes penetrated that. So we're feeling all of this hot fumes going into our lungs. And we had an idea, most of us were welders, that this wasn't good for us, but we had to go find people that were alive, and that was the urgency. So we did what we could do. We helped the firemen, and we were basically in the heart of hell, walking on like a volcano, an erupting volcano. It was very difficult to work on the pile because it was constantly shifting. If you took off a piece of steel or debris, you didn't know what the repercussions were, and things started moving. We cut some steel. I was standing on a piece of steel that all of a sudden rose up into the air about 30 feet and threw me like a feather up into the air onto the pile. They said that it went 30 feet up into the air and came down on my back. When I woke up, there was complete silence. I had no idea if I was dead or alive, but I just saw this huge amount of steel over me. I said, I gotta get out of here. And one of the things that came to my mind was, I don't need to be hurt, I don't need to be dead, because I don't want to add any more sorrow to what's already going on down here. So I got up and I got off the pile. I started walking down the pile, and I saw all of the firemen and iron workers looking at me like they were looking at a ghost. They said, you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine, I'm airborne. And I walked off the pile, and I had iron workers hugging me and kissing me. It was kind of embarrassing, but I was glad that I was alive. I walked down, and I saw my shop steward, Jimmy Chin. He said, Frank, how you feel? I said, not too good. He says, well, go down to the Spirit Cruise. It's a ship that we went down, and he got some coffee and relaxed for a little while. I went down and I hung out with a bunch of other fire workers, another firemen and iron workers that were taking a break. And for some reason, my mind started playing tricks on me. He said, Frank, you're not alive. You died. Well, along with all these other firemen that are here, and you're going on this Spirit Cruise. Needless to say, I was freaking out, so I walked out, and sure enough, there's Jimmy Chin. He says, what's the matter with you now? And I told him the story. He says, you gotta go home. So I drove home. It was about a 90-mile trip, fell asleep at the wheel, almost crashed into a tractor-trailer truck, but got home safe, thank God. And really, I have God to thank for my life today. I came back a few days later, and we basically continued to look for survivors. We did not like the word recovery. We were there to rescue people. We did not want to lose the sight that there were still people there that we can help. But we ended up trying to help everybody. The iron workers did a great job with us, and we did find an intact body. And one of our iron workers, Jerry McDonald, organized a way of getting this fireman out of this pile of steel, twisted steel. And that was a memorable day because we did find somebody that was not alive, but in piece, in one piece, which was, about all we could do. I basically suffered some, back problems after that, some breathing problems after that. After I got out of the 9/11, went back to work at the school, and we decided to build a memorial for the 9/11 memorial. And we built 2 buildings that look like the Trade Center with an American flag at half-mast on one, and an eagle with a fire nozzle in one talon and an ironworker spud wrench in the others, Most of the guys that were with us remember that like it was yesterday, because that was probably it was one of the hardest things that we ever went through in our lives. Definitely was one of the hardest things I ever went through in my life, one of the saddest days in my life, but one of the most memorable days of my life. And I basically met a lot of people that feel and share the same story as I do. I just want to thank you for coming today.
It took just shy of 9 months to clear away all of the debris. And what was left after that, at this point, people could start coming down to the Trade Center again. It wasn't cordoned off as a crime scene. And I remember coming down, and what you saw was this huge crater in the earth. And at that point, it was just light brown earth with nothing in it. 1.8 million tons of steel had to be removed to get to that brown earth. What Frank and the other fire workers did was nothing short of extraordinary. They were here 14 to 16 hours a day for months. When Frank spoke to you about the heat coming up, it's because during those 9 months of clearing out the debris, for 6 of those months, fires burned beneath. And the amount of heat that radiated up was enormous. It was enough so that over the course of a single day, I have heard firefighters tell me that the soles of their boots would literally melt. So it was truly a hellish environment in which to work. The good news is that many of the same iron workers have helped to build the new World Trade Center. And so there's that sense of continuity, of going from destruction to rebirth. And the building of the new Trade Center was absolutely essential. It's still going on, but it was essential for this city to recover. What I'd like to do now is just open this up to all of you. If you have any questions for either Susan or Frank, they would be delighted to answer them.
Yeah, I have a question for Frank.
Yes.
You don't hear a lot about building number 7. What actually caused it to come down? Was it the debris from the other 2 towers, or was it the fires?
I believe it was the fires. When we got there, we weren't actually, didn't really see the building on fire because the freeze line was a few blocks away. But we believe the firemen that the engineers were there, they looked at it, they evacuated the building, they were expecting it to collapse, and probably the fuel and just and also you have to remember they didn't have much firefighting equipment that actually worked because all the lines were severed by the steel that fell down, and they were actually pumping water from the Hudson River by boats to try to put some of the fires out. Okay.
Yeah, 7 was on fire from the first plane hitting the North Tower. That's when it caught fire, when flaming debris came out from that building into number 7, because they were very nearby. And so the fire burned throughout the day. And by about 5:20 that evening, the building was sufficiently, through fire, gutted so that it no longer had any structural integrity, and it collapsed. Anyone else? You're welcome. Please.
Are you originally from here? And after it, why did you decide to stay here?
I am originally I'm a New Yorker, and I feel like, we were maybe a victim for a day, but it doesn't define who we are. So if I don't come back to work every day and come downtown, then they win, I lose. So I'm not giving up.
I think there was another question, yes.
How many people were rescued then from those rescue attempts?
Could you all hear the question? I just realized I should be repeating it. That's fine. The question was, how many people were rescued?
After the collapse, I believe there was only 18 people.
Oh, you mean
After the collapse.
found alive
yeah,
underneath? It was 20.
20. Well, originally the numbers of fatalities were very high. When I first met Lieutenant Colonel Messler in the Army, he told me that he had ordered something like 30,000 body bags. And that number was low because they actually expected more. But that day was a blessing in a way because they had Monday night football that went very late and a lot of people didn't show up for work. There was an election going on, so a lot of people wanted to take their kids to to school late, and there was something else going on that day. I forget what it was,
That's
but
it, Election Day, school.
yeah, and that basically kept the population away from the Trade Center. So I think there was only like 20,000 people that actually showed up that day, on time.
By that point, had the
Yeah.
attacks begun even 10 minutes later, the death toll would have been much higher
Yeah.
because more people would have arrived at that point. All right, well, listen, one more, okay, that'll be the last.
Do you still have dreams about that experience? And I'm wondering if they've changed at all over time.
I'm not typically a dreamer. And if I do, I don't remember. But no, actually those feelings went away after September 11th, and I don't feel that way anymore.
My dream was constantly thinking about saving people, and I had a dream that was kind of plagued me for the rest of my life, I'm sure. I dreamt that there was two young firemen stripped of their clothes on a fire escape, and I basically walked up the fire escape and saw them as, I finally found somebody alive. And they just popped up and laughed and ran away. Have no idea what that meant, but kind of weird though.
You still have that dream?
No, I just remember it. Thank God.
It's memorable.
There's another question.
Okay, one more, the last of it, please. This is great, good. I'll hear you and I'll repeat it.
Of the 20 that were found in the building under the steel, how many days did it take to find them?
The question is, of the 20 people that were rescued alive after the attacks from beneath the rubble, how long did it take to find all of them? Do either of you want to, or should I pick it up?
While I was there, I didn't see anybody being rescued. It was just word of mouth. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that they had some staircases. They call it survivor staircases, where they found a bunch of people alive.
It took only,
About 24 hours, though. I think
Yeah.
everybody was recovered, except for one may have been buried. I forget which one. The police officer was buried for quite a few hours. That they had to dig
the
out.
last person recovered, it was on September the 12th. It was a little after 12:30 in the afternoon. It was a 30-year-old woman. She was found beneath the wreckage of the North Tower. So even for several more days to a week, it was still technically a rescue and recovery effort. Everybody wanted it to be rescue. It really was all recovery. Yeah.
Question, when you were up in the tower, at what point do you realize, like we really need to get out of here?
Well, as soon as the plane came, as soon as I saw the plane coming at me, full speed.
Were you already on your way down?
No. I was watching the plane at my cubicle, talking to my friend and admiring the view when the plane was coming. So as it was coming,
The plane into your building?
well, no, it looked like the towers are only 300 feet apart from each other, so perception is really quite off. So it looked like it was just heading towards us. And as it was heading towards us. It just made a slight turn. And when it made that slight turn, it plunged into Tower 1. But I was eye level with the plane, so I had that visual. But anybody else that didn't have that visual had no idea what happened because it didn't make a lot of noise, and you didn't really smell anything right away. You eventually smelled jet fuel, but if you didn't see it, you didn't know about it, and you wouldn't have that urgency. And that's why so many people in my company did die, and there were different sets of instructions. But 60 people on my floor were killed, but 176 in my company.